So I think one thing that we've sort of learnt tonight is that we're all a little guilty of assessing people's bodies and our own bodies. And I don't mean necessarily like judging, but we check one another out, we make observations. Like you might be looking at me and thinking, oh, she's pretty short, or that's a really awesome outfit. Or you might be thinking, wow, that's a lot of tattoos. Or maybe you don't think that at all. But even if you did, you wouldn't actually really say that to me. Or would you? The whole, wow, you have a lot of tattoos statement is one that I have heard countless times. Now, this is probably because when I started getting tattooed, I was living in the suburbs about 30 minutes east of Toronto in the early 2000s when people in the suburbs were still really freaking out about tattoos. And so this comment was one that I would get a lot. I started getting tattooed when I was 18, literally 3 days after I turned 18. And I went to this tattoo shop in Oshawa, which later closed down for sketchy reasons, but I was fine. And I was pretty goth and pretty angsty at that point in my life, although I don't really know if listening to Evanescence qualifies one as goth or angsty. Yeah, you know. So I went and got this black and red fairy in between my shoulder blades. It's so goth, so angsty. And so at the time though, I didn't really like larger tattoos, like sleeves or chest pieces. But as I sort of moved out of this angsty goth stage and discovered traditional tattoos, I very quickly went from my lovely fairy, my beloved fairy, to a sleeve and a chest piece and thigh tattoos and feet tattoos and this sweet little diamond on my ring finger, which the old ladies really love. It's really funny. They're like, oh, is that how big it's supposed to be? I'm like, yes. So at this point, I'm still living in the suburbs, and I'm working in retail at the Blue Notes in the Pickering Town Center, which is an 8.5 out of 10 on the cool scale of places to work in the burbs at that point. And yeah, Natalie worked there with me, so she knows. And so about if not every day, at least every couple of days, I would have customers come in and they would make a variety of statements or questions, such as, oh, you must really like working in retail. Yeah. Yeah, no joke. Or, aren't you gonna regret that one day? Or my personal favorite was, what does your mother think about that? Now, my mom passed away from cervical cancer when I was 11, so this question hit a real tender spot for me. And my mom was a pretty badass lady. She dyed her hair this fire engine red and wore the most insane clothing. And my dad and I were talking recently, and he and I both agreed that, if my mom were still here, she definitely would have gotten a tattoo with me. Now, I don't say any of these things to these customers who ask this question, what does your mother think about your tattoos? Nor do I tell them that my mother is not alive anymore. Instead, I tell them how, well, my parents are really proud of me. I'm a straight-A student, and, if the worst thing I do is get tattoos, then, I'm doing all right. And as soon as these customers would leave, my coworkers and managers would come up to me, and they would just be so pissed off. And they'd be like, oh my God, you should have just told them that your mom was dead, and then just really shut them up. But for whatever reason, I just could never do that. So instead of shaming them, I let them shame me. Now, once I moved out of the suburbs and into Toronto and got a job on Queen Street, where tattoos are just a thing, these comments basically stopped. There was, a few here or there when I was working at the body shop where, ironically enough, you had to cover all of your tattoos because you did not want to promote marring the body, is what my manager once said to me, who also apparently really liked tattoos. And so this was no easy feat, covering all of them in black all the time. But then I got into a master's program and I got full funding, and so I was able to quit this job, which was really great. And for years, I basically never experienced any negative comments on my tattoos. But before I tell you about my most recent experience, which is very, it's sad that had to happen. But I'll tell you about probably the worst experience I ever had. And this was when I was still living in the suburbs and I was working in the Pickering Town Center, although I was now at the less cool Campus Crew. And I was eating my bagel and having my coffee in the morning in the food court. And 2 tables over from me were these 2 men, probably in their 70s. And I could hear one of them saying to the other about just how sad it was that I just ruined my body, and I would never find a man who would want to marry me. Now, I've heard lots of comments like these, people in close proximity to me wanting to make comments on my tattoos, and normally I would just ignore it. But this morning, I was really pissed off about it, not because of the comments, because obviously ridiculous. None of these things have proven true as of yet, so we're okay. But what bothered me so much was that this guy was 2 feet away, sitting at another table, talking about me, and and he didn't say any of these things to me directly. And so I was okay, I'm gonna take action. And I turned to this man and I said, "Excuse me, sir. Would you please refrain from talking about my tattoos in such close proximity to me?" Yeah, that's what I said. And his response to me was, "Well, you shouldn't be eavesdropping." And I responded by pointing out that he was less than 2 feet away from me, and I did not need to eavesdrop in order to hear his comments. And then I could see that he was getting really visibly angry. And then he proceeded to call me a bitch and tell me to go and die. Yep. So very shortly after this, a minute or two after, him and his friend get up and they leave, and I kind of sit there for a minute or two, pretty visibly shaken. And then I go to the mall security, who we all make fun of when we're teenagers, but when we get older, we realize that they do nice things for people. And so I went to them and, reported this incident. And, they went and they found this gentleman, and they confronted him, and they told him, that what he had did was not cool. And of course, he denied it. But I never saw him in the mall again after that, and, that felt like a small enough victory to me. And then about 6 months after that, I moved into Toronto. So yeah, totally fine for years. And then last month, I was visiting my dad at West Park, which is a long-term care facility where he lives now, and I was in the elevator with this woman who worked there, who is in her 40s or 50s, and she turns to me and she says, "Wow, that's a lot of tattoos." Now, I never know what to say when people say this, because it's a really puzzling and also really funny comment. Because on the one hand, it's like they're making an observation about you that you don't know. It's you have spinach in your teeth after lunch, and someone's "You have spinach in your teeth," and you're "Oh, thank you for pointing that out." But this whole you have tattoos thing, it's sometimes I just feel responding and just being "Oh my God, how did I get all these tattoos?" And then run off screaming or something. So I don't know really what to say to her, so I just try to diffuse it, and I'm just "Yeah, you're right. I have a lot of tattoos." And so then, then she follows this up by saying, "Well, I just really don't like tattoos." And okay, it's you know what you like and you don't like. That's an important skill to have. So, I'm just okay, well, we don't all have to like the same things. Democracy, isn't that great? And just the comment goes in one ear and out the other. And then, she kind of just looks away and just goes, "Oh, if my kids ever," pause, "you kids are gonna regret this one day." And now I know I have some really good genes, thanks mom and dad, but like I'm a week away from turning 30 at this point. And so, I tell her that. I say, I'm going to be 30 next week, therefore not a kid. But by this point we've reached the ground floor. She says goodbye, says, I'll see you back upstairs. And we part ways. And like 2 seconds later, I just kind of am standing there outside of the elevator and I just start fuming. And I just start thinking to myself, why was I so nice to that lady? How dare she police my body? Who just tells another person that they don't like something about their appearance? And so as I've been thinking more and more about this, my usual response, the excuse me, sir, my usual response has been to act like the exact opposite of what these people think of me. They think tattooed girl, high school dropout, probably has a drug addiction, gonna swear at me, probably dangerous, gonna roll her eyes and hates authority. And so, so I always respond by being really polite, soft-spoken, articulate, respectful. But I've started to realize that it doesn't really matter how I respond to these people because they're not really interested in having me change their minds about tattoos. They don't really care about my feelings. And for whatever reason, they feel like they have a right to comment on the choices I've made with my body. So I've been starting to think, what would it feel like if I responded differently? What if I responded exactly the way they thought I would? So, and the other part about this that I guess kind of frustrates me, right? As a woman, we're taught to be very deferential. We're taught to be soft-spoken, to smile, to always be happy. And I realized that, in responding the way that I had, I didn't feel empowered. I didn't feel liberated. I felt oppressed. I felt pretty shitty. So I don't know if I'm ready to jump to the straight, flip him the bird, F you kind of response just yet. But I feel like I might take some baby steps towards that. And maybe, a firm but polite, mind your own business might feel pretty good. Thank you.